Welcome back. I'm Khalil Charles. Signs of economic slowdown in China have led to fears of global recession, which will affect Africa given the close ties that it has with China over the recent years. Anissa Umar has this report.
Years of rapid economic growth across sub-Saharan Africa fueled hopes of a prosperous new era. To many, the world's poorest continent was finally emerging, with economies that were no longer dependent on fickle global demand for Africa's raw resources. But as China's economy slows down and its once seemingly insatiable hunger for Africa's commodities wanes, many African economies are tumbling quickly. Since the start of this year, the outlook across the continent has grown grimmer, especially in its two biggest economies, Nigeria and South Africa. Their currencies fell to record lows this month as China, Africa's biggest trading partner, announced that imports from Africa plummeted nearly 40% in 2015.
There was a lot of concern expressed, and indeed, when your growth slows down, you have to be careful and concerned. But once you look at the numbers, 6.9% growth, which is the slowest growth in the last 25 years, is actually in many ways remarkable good news. There may be no other country in the world today that can say with 6.9% growth, I've done worst performance in 25 years. So it is a testimony to China's remarkably strong performance for 25, 30 years, that a growth of 6.9, which is actually pretty handsome growth, but in comparison to itself, it is a slowdown.
Many economists expect South Africa, the continent's most advanced and diversified economy, to slide into a recession this year, a projection disputed by the government. As Africa's biggest exporter of iron ore to China, South Africa is suffering from a slump in mining, as well as in other sectors like manufacturing and agriculture. Like the currencies of many commodity exporting nations, South Africa's rand has declined sharply in recent months because of the worldwide fall in prices of raw materials and because of poor government policies. The weak rand will make it more painful for South Africa, which is experiencing the worst drought in a generation and is usually an exporter of agricultural products to import corn, the nation's staple. Higher food prices could pose a challenge to the government of the nation's president, Jacob Zuma, who is confronting widening public anger over rising income inequality and whose party, the African National Congress, is expected to face serious challenges in the municipal elections this year. Nigeria, Africa's biggest economy and oil producer, is reeling from the crash in crude prices. At the same time, President Muhammad Buhari tries to deal with Boko Haram, the fighter group that has long terrorized the nation. With oil accounting for 80% of the government revenue, the government may also lack the resources to quell the potential unrest in the Niger Delta, the source of the country's oil. Weakening currencies will make it harder for Nigeria and many other African governments to repay China for loans used to build larger infrastructure projects. The tumbling naira and China's downturn are also reverberating across private businesses, large and small. Anissa Omar, Africa This Week.
Now to discuss this is Gabino Guerengomba, who is the co-founder of the integrated solar technology based in Bangui in the Central African Republic. And we also have Mario Guerendo, who is a business analyst at EcoTech Solutions Group in Indiana, United States. Thank you both for coming on to the program. Now, I'd like to start with Gabino and ask you about your own relationship, if you like, the business that you do and your relationship with China, and how is the Chinese economic downturn actually going to affect your business, or is it already affecting your business? That's my question.
First of all, thanks for having me. We are actually a research and development of the advanced solar module that is custom designed for Africa. but we're actually based out of Pittsburgh in the United States at the Carnegie Mellon University. So, well, in essence, as far as how China is impacting our business, per se, well, first, let's put that as a cutting-edge innovation for solar. We have not ventured out to so much put our manufacturing in China, just for intellectual property concern and strategy, to be honest. So we've actually maintained all of our production and manufacturing to the United States at this point.
Okay, so can I ask Mario the same question in terms of the work that you do and your involvement with the continent and China?
Guys, are you there?
Yes, I am. Mario, I was just asking you the same question I asked to Gabino, and that was with regard to the work that you do in your company and what connections it has with the continent and China.
Okay, so we are actually a technology solution provider. We work mainly in information communication technology and hosted unified communications. We have an office in the Central African Republic to service the sub-Saharan region of the continent. And in regards to our relationship with China, a lot of our product manufacturers, the products that we use for our solutions and deployments, are manufactured in China. Now, in terms of the slowdown in the Chinese economy, we have not yet felt it. We've seen it. We're seeing it on paper on the releases for 2016 on new product. The list is getting shorter and shorter, but it hasn't not impacted us yet because there's still a large global inventory of cutting-edge product for our industry. So as it is right now, it has not affected us yet.
We saw in our videotape when we were talking earlier about the way in which it has affected and impacted on South Africa. Of course, the rand has gone through the floor in a sense, and also over in Nigeria, also the problems there as well. Do you think we'll be seeing more and more countries that's going to be affected by this slowdown? Or is, in a sense, there's an over-exaggeration about the effect that China may or may not have?
I think there is a small exaggeration on the impact that the slowdown in the Chinese economy will have. If we go back to looking at the China-Africa relationship, most of the trading on the business side has been the large-scale structural project, soft loans. High interest, I should say, high interest soft loan proposed to some of the African countries with the richest natural resources like Nigeria, South Africa, and that kind of thing. So, although the impact will be felt if the Chinese economy was going to take a significant hit, it would not be as significant as some of the analysts are describing because the positive impact in Africa alone is pretty low. Chinese benefits more from that relationship than Africa does. And we also have to keep it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting, Mario, that you say that there is a benefit greater for China than the African continent. But in a sense, had it not been for China, many of the large-scale investments and infrastructural investments perhaps wouldn't have gone ahead. So doesn't the African continent quite depend on, if you like, at the time of need, the Chinese have come to their assistance? Can I put that question also to Gabino with regard to the way in which the relationship between Africa and China has developed? Is China's input essential to the African economy, and is China's input, is that what's driving the African economy, many of which are very successful at the moment?
Right. Well, thank you so much. I think to add to Mario's point there, let's first identify that China's manufacturing and finished product that was sent to Africa thus far, I guess, although it has really fueled much of the economy, but it's all based on very SM, small medium enterprises of subsistence, meaning just finished products that mostly mobile merchants can sell really quickly to make a living. However, I think the idea was never that this was going to be the relationship or the trade that will benefit Africa. And to Mario's point, again, I think it is rightfully that as cutting edge and Africa-targeted innovations, such as what we're working on, and Africa look more to bring about actually manufacturing capabilities on the continent instead of just outsourcing all of it, to China, the way it's been done. I think we're going to see more value locally and more stability on the continent. It's just that, okay, let's put it this way. I mean, only 20 years ago, people were laughing at, made in China. However, Chinese have been very consistent and persistent about producing what the world wants at the quality that the world is willing to pay for and cheaper than everybody else. This is pretty much the name of the game. So Africa needs to understand that as well, and then kind of apply the same strategy. And I think we should be okay.
Indeed, I just remember the time that I've spent in Sudan, and the Chinese were very prominent in putting the petrol industry, getting it onto its feet there. And one of these systems that they had was buying, operating, and transferring. Mary, I want to ask you whether that system is still there in Africa, whether the infrastructural needs that people need in Africa are being provided by the Chinese. They're buying that and then putting it into place, and then operating it for a number of years, and then giving it back to the Africans. Is that system happening? Is it something that we're seeing across the continent?
So it is happening, but we're not seeing it across the continent as of today. There's very targeted geographical regions that China has been focusing this strategy on. But as an overall initiative for African infrastructure development, we really don't see that as being sustainable or even working. When we look back, I'm just going to piggyback on something Gabino said, leveraging or developing the African capabilities for local production, whether it's for infrastructure, manufacturing, this is still an issue. It's almost non-existent in the continent. Everything is manufactured in China and shipped to Africa, including the infrastructure, bridges, things like that are being manufactured in China, and the finished product is being shipped to Africa and managed by the Chinese and installed by the Chinese workforce. So in terms of positive impact on the African economy, we don't see that as a valuable solution or sustainable for that matter.
I wanted to ask you, because in terms of the presence of the Chinese in Africa, we are seeing the Chinese making their homes in Africa, coming and doing business and actually staying there. You talk about them doing most of their production away from Africa, but why is it we're seeing such a build-up, if you like, of personnel inside Africa, in West Africa, in East Africa, and indeed across the continent?
In my opinion, this is just mostly to protect and manage their own interests and investments in the region. Because they come in, they build their communities and their workforce who are mostly Chinese and have a constant relationship with China. So it's almost like having a mini China in some African countries.
This brings us to the point of, yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying, Mario, but this brings us to the point of the comparison, if there is to be, if we can make a comparison between the colonial masters of the yesteryear and the Chinese now. Can I perhaps come to Gabino and ask you that now? What do you feel about the comparison between the old colonial masters and what we're seeing the Chinese doing in Africa now?
Right. I mean, I think definitely the analogy of perception is there. However, I think I'm one of those that I think it falls onto our lap as African and to our leadership. What we've seen is this. I mean, and to the point that Mario just mentioned earlier, and in a build-operate transfer, we just recently reached a deal with the government Benin, and we pushed the angle of build, operate, and transfer, but leveraging the local workforce of the Ministry of Energy. And there's a reason why. Because, you know, for the long, it's up to us Africans to wisen up about how our leadership go about negotiating trade deals and relationship, because Chinese will put everything on the table. If you want turnkey, meaning if you're going to bring the finished product all the way to the person that, you know, that mobs the floor, they will provide that. But if you go and then you say, look, we are going to export, you know, we are going to outsource XYZ to you. However, let's also leverage our transfer of knowledge, bring value into it, negotiate better terms. I think that falls onto the lap of Africans. So, yes, you know, if just like the way it happened in colonization, if we're not going to be able to stand our turf as far as negotiating better terms and smarter way of trading and creating value on the continent in terms of manufacturing and trade, of course, the Chinese are going to take over, even in a worse way that the previous colonization that most African countries have known.
Mario, do you agree with that? Do you agree that the onus is on the African leaders and countries themselves to ensure that they get good deals with the Chinese? Or do you feel that the Chinese, the kind of business that they're wanting to do, tends to be pretty, if you like, tilted towards the Chinese and in their favor?
No, I completely agree with Gabino's point. I believe that ultimately the responsibility falls back into the hands of the African leaders, and with going into negotiations with the right terms to benefit the continent and being treated as a fair trade partner, not as colony. So I completely agree with Gabino's point.
I accept that, but the point I was quite interested in hearing from you is the way in which you suggested earlier that China were basically going and giving soft loans, which was in fact, you know, more beneficial to themselves than the African partners.
Yes. So those
Hello, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll repeat my question about the soft loans that China are giving, which tends to be in the Chinese favor, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Those soft loans that are proposed to African countries for their natural resources are high interest loans. So it gives a perception of helping, but in reality, when you look at the numbers, those loans are really damaging for some of the entrepreneurs.
Indeed. And
because of the interest rate.
I hear that. And in terms of the alternatives, what alternatives do the African countries have? Because on the one end, you're being told by the European governments and the World Banks, etc., that we're going to give you aid and we're going to give you infrastructural projects if there is, with lots of strings attached and lots of high interest. And now you're also saying that China are also offering these soft loans at incredible amounts of interest. So there's a no-win situation there for the Africans.
Well, actually, there is another alternative that's not being considered, and that's the venture capital. The venture capital is a much better option for African entrepreneurs than the high interest soft loans provided by China.
Indeed. Can I go back to Gabino and ask you what you now expect to happen with the Chinese situation? I think Mario felt that there's been a slight exaggeration in the case. Do you agree with that point? Do you think that the Chinese turn down will continue to affect the African economies?
Well, I think that it is definitely a situation that if should we, as African, whether we African entrepreneurs and leadership, play our card right, it could work in our favor. Here's why. I believe that you see a growth and now, a transformative, manufacturing and sustained growth that's progressively happening in Africa, meaning now you start having finished product being created on the continent. So that's the angle we have to use. We cannot just be content with, say, hey, getting not only money, but also all the manufacturing turnkey from China or Europe, what have you. But I think the key here is, well, Africa is the continent with the largest amount of raw materials and various resources. However, not even up to 10% of it are turned into, finished product on the continent. So I think, let's not just be, let's also look in this a challenge, but an opportunity for us to start thinking in terms of, bringing really added value and manufacturing infrastructures and facility to Africa, and instead of just being happy with consumers of finished product imported from China.
Thank you very much indeed, Gabino, and also to Mario for joining me on that issue of China's relationship with Africa. That has certainly been a very interesting conversation. We've come to the end of our program, so I'd like to thank all my guests for joining the show and for you at home for watching. We'll leave you with pictures at the start of the presidential candidacy of the former Comoros president, Azumani Azili. He is up against 25 other hopefuls. Until next week, have a good evening.